Investigator Wilbanks.
Mr. Wilbanks, could you state your name for the record?
Yes, it's John. Last name Wilbanks, W-I-L-B-A-N-K-S.
Where do you work, sir?
The Gwinnett County District Attorney's Office.
In what capacity?
I'm a criminal investigator for the Drug and Gang Task Force.
What law enforcement experience do you have?
In civilian law enforcement, I started in 1998, so this is my 27th year. I started with the Gwinnett County Police Department in that year. I did my first 17 years there. 13 out of the 17 years I did robbery and homicide investigations. And in 2015, I came here to the District Attorney's Office. I had a short retirement and then came back.
What are your responsibilities currently with the District Attorney's Office?
As a criminal investigator assigned to the unit I'm in, I get cases from the point of a warrant being taken and or someone being arrested for a felony offense that falls into a certain category of crimes that comes to our unit. And then I handle working that case up and getting it ready for trial as we are here today. So there are police investigators that handle it initially in a lot of cases. And then once it comes to our office, we help get it across the finish line, I guess you could say, if there's any additional interviews that need to be done or additional evidence that needs to be sought. And from time to time, I do work like I did in this case, which is looking at phone records.
What training and experience do you have that qualifies you to look at phone records?
I've got between 150, 200 hours of training regarding different types of examination of phone records and or cellular devices. So that's through a number of companies. One of those companies is a company called Cellphone, which teaches us about phones, how they work, and how data can get extracted from the actual devices. But I've also been trained by the FBI's CAST team, which is their cellular analysis team that the FBI uses. I've been trained by other civilian training companies as well. So it's not one source for my information. I've gone through a variety of training for that.
As part of the FBI training and the other training you referred to, are you required to test your proficiency in those matters?
Yes, you do. Well, you do practical exercises in there, and there is some testing as well. Yes.
And do they give certifications once you successfully pass their courses?
In some cases, it's a certification. In some cases, it's just a diploma that you've passed the course.
And do you have certifications as it relates to the examination of cell phones?
Yes.
And about how many cell phone examinations have you done over your career?
I would say it's in the dozens of actual downloads, extractions, but I mean, I've looked at in my career, I'd probably put it individual device extractions, probably hundreds.
And let's distinguish between the person that testified before you, Detective Duranzio. Are you familiar with him?
I am.
What he did and what you did. Detective Duranzio has testified about Cellphone records. Are you going to be testifying about Cellphone records or something else?
I'm going to be testifying about what happens on the cellular network once a device is being used within the network.
Okay. And have you done that before as an expert witness?
Yes.
Judge, at this time would tender Mr. Wilbanks as an expert in cell phone data examination.
Judge, I don't have any objection to that.
No, I have no objection, Your Honor.
No objection. All right. Investigator Wilbanks will be tendered as an expert, qualified as an expert.
Detective Wilbanks, as it relates to this case, were you able to get the certified business records involving 470-886-5190 business records of Josiah Hewley from T-Mobile?
Yes.
Were you able to get 470-342-9346 business records from AT&T of David Booker?
Yes.
Were you able to get 678-542-6398 business records of T-Mobile regarding Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Were you able to get business records 470-839-1041 business records of Jeremiah Pledger's T-Mobile account?
Yes.
I'm going to share this with previously warranted State's Exhibit number 83. Have you had an opportunity to examine State's 83?
Yes, I created this exhibit.
And that you created, is that a download of the business records of the companies that we just mentioned on the phones we just mentioned?
Yes, this is where I put the records from that I used in this case.
Thank you. Your Honor, we tender State's 83 at this time.
No objection, Judge.
Yes, no, I guess not, no, I don't have an objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, State's Exhibit 83 is admitted without objection.
Mr. Wilbanks, when you are looking at the business records for cell phone companies, do they have a lot of data points?
Yes, quite a lot.
Hundreds,
Hundreds,
sometimes thousands?
thousands.
When you're able to take those voluminous records, and are you able to make summaries and charts to more easily explain it to the jury?
Yes, in fact, if I just put up the data, it would probably mean almost nothing to you just to look at data. It comes in the form of spreadsheets, and I think you may have used the word voluminous, and that's a good explanation.
I'd like to
Show you what's been previously marked and shown to defense counsel as States 84. Do you recognize States 84?
I do.
How do you recognize States 84?
I created this exhibit as well.
And is that an exhibit created of the voluminous records contained in States 83?
It is.
Your Honor, this time we tender States 84.
Objection, Judge.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection.
State's 84, excuse me, is admitted without objection.
Now, when we're talking about States 84, did you do a PowerPoint presentation?
I did.
And I'd like to pull that up, Your Honor, publish States 83 and have walk through his report with the jury. If I may.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Just 1 second. Let me give you the PowerPoint clicker.
Okay.
If you got a pointer, feel free to step down once it comes up. We'll walk it through.
All right.
Give you a heads up just a second. You want to, oops, sorry. Yeah. Excuse me, guys.
You're fine.
I told you we'd have at least one IT issue during the trial. If this is the only one we'll have, I'll be happy.
About to come up. We're good to go.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Can I stand, John?
Absolutely. Can everyone see, or do you want me to turn one light off for the glare? Yes, okay. Sometimes there's a glare on it. Is that better? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So this first slide is just orienting you to the data that I looked at. I reviewed Investigator Harrison's investigator's report to get information about what I needed to look for in the data, and then I reviewed these phone numbers as I understood them to be associated with the different subjects in the case.
There you go.
All right, so the first phone number that we'll look at is the device I understood to be associated with Mr. Booker at 470-342-9346. So in this particular phone, it's an AT&T phone. We're going to have what's called CSLI, that stands for Cell Site Location Information, and we obtained what's called LOCDOBOR data. That stands for Location Database of Record. So to begin to explain to you what you're going to see in the slides that come forward, the different phone companies use different technologies. They don't all use the same type of technology. Lope-de-Boer is a type of technology that only AT&T uses of the big three that we have in this area. And I'll explain further what that is. And in cell site location, every phone company, every cellular network provider is going to have cell site location information. And so this may be a good appropriate time to explain how the phone works with the network,
Yeah.
so that you can further understand that.
If you would.
Okay, so at any given time, when
You
your
can sit
phone-
down if you need to,
Okay.
Detective Wilkins.
So any given time, when you are using your cell phone and it's on, it has to have, in order for it to be effective and you to be able to make or receive a call, it needs to have a way to get into the network through radio frequency signals, okay? And so in order for that to happen, there has to be some communication or connectivity between your device and the network. When we talk about cell site location information, what we're talking about is that record of a transaction between your device and the network. The network keeps a log or an accounting of that information. We get that information from them through a Superior Court search warrant. And once we obtain that information, we can then begin to look at it and analyze it through a software that I use called PinLink or PLX. Now, the information contained in the cell site location information is things like the date and time of a call and the duration of the call, different codes about what took place in the network with the call. But what's going to be very important in this case is that LI part, or that location information part. That's the data about what access point to the network the phone communicated through in order to make the call. You've probably all driven along the highways and seen the big giant towers that your phones connect to the towers through. There are different types of towers. Most towers are broken down into sectors around the tower. So we can look at the phone records and we can determine that a call was routed or took place through not only the location of a tower, but through one of the sectors on that tower. So in other words, we're breaking down 360-degree coverage into smaller components through the different radio frequency panels on the tower. There is, like I said, a variety of types of towers. Some of them are tuned to cover activity in a very close area. Some of them communicate over a very long distance. And so it just depends on the type of terrain you're talking about, the type of infrastructure you're talking about, the nature of how many people might use a particular area. So in this case, you're going to see a lot of these slides are broken down into a 3-mile distance from the tower out to the edge of a shaded area that I'll demonstrate that on. But that's not always necessarily indicative of a phone being all the way out at a 3-mile area. What I'm going to show you is some shaded areas, and that the device could have been anywhere in that shaded area. I can't tell you exactly where it is. I just know that it's reasonable to believe it could have been somewhere in that shaded area. Now, there are, as I said, different technologies. One of the earlier slides you'll see in here is what's called an omnidirectional tower. I only saw one of those towers on the records in this case, and it will be on Mr. Booker's phone records. Those towers handle communication in a very small area, small geographic area. This one and this presentation will be in downtown Atlanta. And that makes sense because in built-up urban areas, you have lots of buildings, lots of infrastructure, and you need more access points so that the communication doesn't get broken down trying to travel through a building or something like that. So it's an easier way to access the network. So that's our cell site location information that we'll talk about. In this case, I'll talk about Lope-de-Boer as well. Now, Lope-de-Boer, location, database of record. Remember I told you only AT&T uses that term of the big three we have in Atlanta. T-Mobile and Verizon will use a timing advanced data. They collect it, they call it something different, but it's basically the same thing. It's what happens when you're not actually using your phone to do anything. The CSLI is when you're actually using your phone to interact with the network in some way. You've either made a phone call, you've received a phone call, a text, something like that. With the timing advance or the loc de bour, what's happening is the network is measuring a signal from your device to determine a general idea of where it might find you if and when you need to get into the network or it needs to route a phone call to you. So that information, loc de bour or timing advance, is very limited in duration. In other words, if I wanted to go back, I'll give you a hard example. T-Mobile only keeps it currently for 30 days. So unlike your cell site location information, which they may have for years, they don't keep timing advance or loc de bour that long. So it's robust data kept for a very brief period of time. So as we go forward, there will be demonstrations of both types of data in here, and I'll point out the difference.
Okay. If you go to the next slide, please, sir. Tell us what we're looking at.
Okay, so in this slide, at the top of each of the slides, I'll give you a description of what's taking place up here. We're going to stay on Mr. Booker's device, and I'm going to go individually through each user's devices, and we'll talk about 2 days. We'll talk about July 9th, and we'll talk about July 10th of 2022. So in July 9th, what we have here is the device I understood to be associated with Mr. Booker. It had loc de bour data in downtown Atlanta at or about in the proximity of 635 Lindbergh Drive in Atlanta. And I understood from the reports that there was information related to subjects involved in the case having been at this Texaco station on July 9th. And this is demonstrating at 1:43. When I looked at the data, I found that his device could have been there. You will see here that you get different measurements. So we have different measurements of the size of the area that the loc de bour has measured. What's happened is in the data we get from AT&T, they give us a latitude and longitude, and then they give us what they believe to be a degree of accuracy that's within so many meters or more. And so this is just a visual representation of their minimal measurement of that location. So here, this larger one is at 1:16 a.m., still at 1:16 a.m. with the second measurement, and at 1:43, I believe it is a.m., we have it north of here on, it's like Piedmont, down the line.
Okay, you talked about loc de bour. What about CSLI? Did Mr. Booker make a phone call during this time period?
Yes, and as we go forward in the additional slides, during the time period of this, we'll break down as we go forward each of the different types of technology for each device. So, CSLI, remember, we're only going to have that when the person actually uses the device. So, I found where there was an outgoing phone call from Mr. Booker's device to the number associated with Mr. Miles Collins, and that took place at 49 minutes after midnight, so 12:49 a.m. on July 9th, and it placed it here, a location south and west of the Texaco station, but this is, as I say, at 12:49 a.m. I'm going to bring, I did an outset of, or a close-up of where the base of this tower is right here, and I did this so that when we later look at Mr. Miles Collins' records, you will see that his hit a similar, for this call, his phone registered a similar geographic area. It'll be very close to here, so when we get to that point, I'll be referencing back, and that's why I did this. You'll see that in his case, being on AT&T's network, his tower and sector was just north and east of the intersection of I-20 and Fulton Industrial. When we get to Mr. Collins, you'll see that his is just south on a T-Mobile tower. But remember, those are different carriers and could be on different towers.
Were you able to capture a picture of the tower under consideration that you've talked about?
You can barely see it here in this image,
Right.
but it's barely.
If you'll advance to the next slide.
So, for Mr. Booker, for July 9th, there was another phone call at 1:17 a.m. and that placed his device communicating with this tower here. And I've shown you a photograph of this tower because as you look at this, you may think, well, that doesn't look like anything close to what I see when I drive down the road. You will find that in particular with AT&T, they've been installing these types of radio access locations into the network. This is, as you see, this is in a more built-up area in Atlanta. These types of towers don't communicate over miles. They tend to communicate over hundreds of meters distance. So this one has a much smaller degree of likelihood of communication as far as distance goes.
Anything else significant about that slide?
No.
Okay. So we'll go to the next slide and move forward to the data.
Control.
Thank you. Tell us what we're looking at here.
So as you can see here, this is going to be Mr. Booker's phone. We're now on July 10th for him. From 10:07 a.m. through 11:20 a.m., what I noticed was I looked at the data and I wanted to know when I began to see something related to that phone moving on that day. And what I noticed was at about 10:07, I could see look-to-board data showing it, the device moving a little bit south, a little bit east towards Lithonia before then turning around and traveling slightly northwest and then north to an area as if you could be going towards the QT in this case. And this is the last measurement at 11:20 that I would see for about 30 minutes, and I'll demonstrate that on the next slide.
Well, in this slide, before we advance, you talked about look-to-bore versus CSLI. And if I understood you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, look-to-bore is kind of passing of the time from cell tower to cell tower. Is that about right?
Well, it's
Even if you're not on the phone?
you're not on the phone, but it's periodically measuring information about where it believes the device might be geographically in order to give it access to the network. And what I've typically seen is when the device is moving, there tends to be more data during that time period. That's been my experience from looking at a lot of records. So that's why it almost looks like a breadcrumb trail, as if it's going in that direction.
And when we're looking at that map right there, is that consistent with any major thoroughfares in Atlanta?
Yes, it's consistent with I-20 to 285 and then 285 to probably the industrial area roughly.
All right, so this goes from 10:07 a.m. to 11:20 a.m. Do you recall when the shooting occurred?
I believe it was at about 12:38 p.m.
All right, so let's advance. Before we go here, we did not have a slide on CSLI during that time period.
Would you expect to see CSLI with someone's phone if they're riding in the same car?
No, I wouldn't expect to see two people call each other in the same car.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go to the next slide.
So this slide demonstrates that from 11:20 to 11:50 a.m. for Mr. Booker, there is a gap in the data, and I've done an outset here. So this is what a loc-de-bore report looks like from AT&T. And what you'll see here is military time. The records are provided in military time, but you may be thinking, why are you talking about 11:20 to 11:50 when in fact over here it says 15:20 to 15:50, which is military time from 3:20 to 3:50. Well, the explanation for that is that T-Mobile and AT&T keep their records in what's called UTC time. UTC time, Uniform Time Coordinated, is a standard timekeeping method for phone companies and other companies as well. And so in order to get the time zone that any device was in, you have to convert from UTC to your time zone. And in this case, we're converting to Eastern Standard Time. At this time of the year, I would have to subtract 4 hours from that to get the actual Eastern Standard Time for the records and for the device. I know it's in the Eastern Time Zone because I can tell from the location of the device. So there's no question it's in the Eastern Time Zone. And so I do that conversion, and then I come up with the right number in order to do the mapping. This is something that I can have PLX do for me automatically. and then I check it to see if it's done accurate. But for 30 minutes, we're not going to have any in his records, so there was nothing to map for that next 30 minutes.
Next slide, please.
So the next time that we're going to have information regarding Loc de Boer is at 11:50 a.m. Mr. Booker, and here I've drawn out that radius to 600 meters to reflect what's in the records, although it could be outside of that. But that's what the records are telling me, and it shows that it's within the general area of the QT of interest in this case.
I want to make sure
I understand this. So the cell tower under consideration is the center of this circle. Is that correct?
No, so this is what's happening is the phone company the phone is measuring what it believes to be its geographic location.
Oh,
And-
the company believes that.
Right.
Okay.
The company says it believes the device is probably here, but it could be anywhere in here, and it may be a little bit outside of that, but that's the phone company's best estimate of where it would likely be if it needed to communicate with the device.
So if I understand you right, the QT right there at the forum is within the range of possibility for his cell phone.
Right.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the next slide.
So this is all the Loc de Boer I saw on the phone between 11:52 and 12:30. So to summarize what I saw in the data, what I saw was at 11:52 a.m., AT&T had measured the device here, close to the area of the QT, and then AT&T measured the device moving away, so that by 12:25, it had moved south back towards roughly the 285 area, before then returning by 12:30 back to that same area of the QT.
So it went down and then back up?
Went down and came back up. And I will point out to you, I believe it's Mr. Hewley's device, when I looked at it, it did almost exactly the same thing. And it's on a different network. Different records. The two phone companies don't keep records together, yet the records will reflect that both devices did something very similar.
All right, let's go to the next slide.
So this is by 12:31. Loc de Boer for Booker's device shows it 2 measurements in that minute time frame, and this is a visual depiction of its measurement being at or around the area.
Why do we have 2 concentric shaded areas, sir?
Well, because there's 2 measurements, and it returned 2 different levels of certainty. So one measurement had one level of certainty, the other one had a different level of certainty.
Okay, next slide.
So this is showing all of the Loc de Boer data from 12:32 to 12:39, with all of that data showing AT&T's belief that the device was somewhere in that general area of the QT.
Thank you. Then what happened?
And then what we saw was that starting at 12:40, I could see where there was information in the records that tended to show that the device moved out of the area generally associated with that QT, and the device registered on AT&T's network to be somewhere close to Turnberry Place in the Stonecrest area, which I understood from the report to be a location of interest in the evidence.
So I'm not seeing the same path to travel afterwards as I did beforehand. Does this indicate a different path to travel?
Well, we have less data in here, and it could be, but there's less data overall in here as well. But it could have been 285.
My memory is that on the other slide, that the phone was tracking 20 to 85. Does this show 20 to 85?
No, I believe it showed 285 in the previous one, I believe. Oh, let me go back and look at it. I believe that's the case.
That's my bad. Thank you. But as far as the relevant times, 12:40 in the QT area, 11:13 down by Turnberry Place in Stonecrest.
Yes, by 1:13 p.m. it was back in an area disassociated with you.
All right, and if you could go to the next slide.
So this is zooming in to only show you that one point at 1:13 p.m. This center again is AT&T's measurement of where it thinks the device is and its location around Turnberry Place address.
Thank you. Go to the next slide.
So what I noticed is I wanted to see where the device registered after that, and this is from 1:37 p.m., 1:45 p.m., and then 1:45 again, a little bit later in that minute time frame, and the device seems to be moving away from Turnberry Place by 1:37 to 1:45. We see what appears to be moving away.
Thank you. Go to the next slide, please.
So now we're going to look at cell site location information for that device for the date of July 10th. All previous slides we've talked about are look-to-board data. We're now going to show you something that looks different. Now you're not going to have that center location of the latitude and longitudinal point where AT&T thinks the device is and the degree of certainty. We're now going to have the cell site location information, which shows you that tower located at the center point here and a sector in an area where the device made a call, registered on the network. This call here is at 12:23. This one was at 12:22. So we've backed up a little bit now. We've looked at the local all the way through. Now we're going to back up and look at the cell site location information.
Investigator Wilbanks,
We talked about CSLI and cell towers, and you mentioned that there's different phases or faces of the tower. Are they pied like in three? Do they have pies?
It can be that, it can be smaller. Generally, it's in 3 parts, but it can be smaller than that, depending on technology. Or you could have one, like I say, an omnidirectional tower, like we talked about earlier. This is a reflection of the phone records combined with a master tower list from the phone company to tell us where it's at.
So when I'm looking at this cell tower, I notice that it's a third, at least to me, it's a third of the circle. Does this indicate that it's not within this third of the circle going to the lower right? Is that what this indicates?
So what happens with your radio frequencies is it's not a hard line in reality the way you see it here. This is the only visual depiction I can give you of it. In reality, what happens is that there can be there's almost surely going to be some overlap in between sectors, but it's not going to be, it's not going to be miles or half mile, anything like that. It's going to be fairly close to those boundaries. So the best information I can give you is that I can say that it's likely somewhere in this area for this call at 12:23. I can't tell you exactly where it was when it made the phone call. Or this was an incoming call, but I can't tell you where that device was. I can just tell you that this is my best just visual representation of where it could.
all right, let's go to the next slide.
So this is from 12:23 to 12:24. 12:23, there was a call here on this tower, this sector, and then 12:24, it had shifted a little bit south of there to this tower and this sector, covering an area that would be, if you were on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, you would be covered by that tower. This is, I found consistency between the loc-de-bore and the CSLI, because we saw with the loc-de-bore, it did the exact same thing. It went south and then it turned around and went north.
Thank you. Next slide.
And so I didn't have any additional cell site location information until 12:56. This was after I understood the reported time of the murder. So by 12:56, the device registers here, an area very south of the QT on a tower in a sector that is closer to Turnberry Place than it is to the QT.
And did you have information as to Mr. Booker's residence?
I did, and I think it's in the later slides, and
Yes.
that's moving in the direction of his residence as well.
Can we go to the next slide?
And this slide demonstrates that the next time that there is a phone call, it will be an outgoing phone call. It will have occurred at 1:47 p.m., and it's a tower along Covington Highway here and a tower and sector, that if he were at home, it would be consistent. By that time, it would be consistent with using a tower locally. And so that's the totality of the records I saw for Mr. Booker, relevant to what I understood to be those 2 days of time.
Actual text, things like that would be taken off of a cell phone extraction at Durango.
It would, to whatever extent that existed, and it's a good point. Looking at the records, one of the things that the phone companies generally don't keep is location information related to text messaging. So if there was a text, you would not see it reflected here. You would see that reflected in the phone records with no location information associated with it.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about Mr. Miles Collins' phone.
Okay, so the 678-542-6398 number, the records that I was provided that had come from T-Mobile, there was no timing advance data in those records. The phone companies sometimes have that type of data, sometimes they don't. But they did have, and generally always do, the cell site location information. And they didn't have anything that we call data sessions, which is use of data over the network. There was no data sessions provided in the records that I obtained. So for him, it's only going to be the cell site location.
All right, what did that show you?
So the first thing I looked at was that July 9th date that we talked about. If you remember earlier, I told you that I would have seen, or I would see some consistency between that phone call between the number associated with Miles Collins and the one associated with Mr. Booker. So this outgoing phone call from the 6398 number to Mr. Booker's phone, registered here, Southwest Atlanta area, in a tower and a sector, that was very consistent with where Mr. Booker's device showed. If you remember, I showed you a tower and a sector here for his device on the AT&T network, just north and east, and on T-Mobile's network, Mr. Collins' device registered here.
Okay. Next slide, please.
So there was no data between 12:50 a.m. and 3:49 a.m. And this is just me showing you in the records. This is what the actual CSLI records from T-Mobile look like. I'm going to point out again that time. So remember what I said earlier, we've got to subtract that 4 hours to get to the right time. So when I subtract 4 from 4:50 a.m., I get 12:50 a.m. And then it doesn't register any other phone calls on the network until 3:49 a.m. So the period I understood to be relevant at the Texaco, there was no data to make any determination during that time frame for his device.
So T-Mobile uses UTC time as well?
T-Mobile uses UTC time as well. So for both of those, there has to be a conversion. And they make it easy for us. They tell us up here in the instructions that that's what we need to do.
Okay. Next slide.
There was some cell site location information for the following day, July 10th. I found a couple phone calls. This here at a tower and a sector in the Lithonia area. That call takes place at 10:06 a.m. It's an outgoing phone call from that device. And it's in the general area that could be consistent with his residence if he was there. By 11:23 a.m., the device had traveled clearly north of there to an area that wasn't, I could not say at the QT, but could be closer to that area than his residence.
Okay, and I just
Just want to make sure. This is CSLI, not Locabar, is that
Right.
correct? You couldn't get Locabar off from Mr. Collins' phone?
So T-Mobile calling a timing advance, they didn't have any for that time period according to the records that I received.
And Locabar would be the things that would indicate a baton handoff from tower to tower?
Well, not a handoff per se, but a location measurement
Yeah.
process. And T-Mobile's going to look differently. When we get to another T-Mobile device that will have it, it's going to look different, but it's the same general concept.
all right. Next slide, please.
So there were several phone calls from 12:51 p.m. That's the next event I saw in that device through 1:02 p.m. These were all phone calls. An outgoing phone call at 12:51 p.m. to the number I understood associated with Ms. Pleasure. At 12:57 p.m., an incoming phone call to the device from the number I understood to be Ms. Pleasure. And then at 1:02 p.m., an incoming call from the phone number I understood to be Ms. Pleasure. And what we can tell here is that we started at 12:51, and by the time we've ended in this time period, we're at 1:02, and the device has clearly moved south, slightly southeast.
Okay, thank you. Next phone call. I'm sorry, next slide.
So from 12:24 to, from 1:24 p.m. through 1:26 p.m., we've got 4 phone calls that took place with the device. All of them on a tower and a sector here, associated with an area generally in the Lithonia near I-20 area, and it was an area that would be consistent with the Turnberry Place address if the device was in that area.
Did you have a chance to review Josiah Hewley's phone?
Yes.
Okay, let's go through that.
So for Josiah Hewley, the 470-86-5190 number, this is going to be a T-Mobile account, just like the last one we talked about, except his records, there were some data station data, and there was some timing advance data. And again, that data session is just getting on the internet, watching YouTube or something on the device that would have interacted with the network. So first on his device, just like the others, I looked at July 9th, and what I found was that there was lots of timing advance data on the device from 12 a.m. through 1:43 a.m., and all of that data did not place it in or around that Texaco, and in fact, I would say there's no evidence to show that Mr. Hewley's device was in or around that data. That was timing advance. This is a data session that registered with the tower in a sector, placing it, a device in the area consistent with the Panthersville area. Again, no evidence that it was in or around the Texaco.
Right.
And finally, cell site location information. There was also a phone call. It was an outgoing phone call at 1:15 a.m. And that outgoing phone call registered with a tower and sector, again, in that Panthersville area generally, and not an area consistent with the Texaco.
Next.
All right, now this is going to be timing advance data from the device from 10 a.m. through 11:25 a.m. And what I saw was something very consistent with what we saw with Mr. Booker's device. Even though Mr. Booker's device was on AT&T and this is T-Mobile, what we saw was location information that placed it traveling in from an area here, first going south to southeast, just like with Mr. Booker's device, and then traveling north to the area of Peachtree Corners.
Thank you.
And this is timing advance data for that last few minutes leading up to 11:25 a.m. Now, when you look at this, it looks different than the low-to-bore. With the low-to-bore, we had a location, and then we had a degree of accuracy or an estimate. With timing advance, we can get a location. We do have some GPS location information in here, but with their records, the way that we map them is that they give us a tower and a sector, and they give us a degree of accuracy of how far off of that tower and sector the network believes that the device is located. So their records reflect visually a little bit differently than what low-to-bore does. But to summarize what we're seeing here is it's going in the area towards the.
Thank you. Next slide.
And this is just that final location measurement at 11:25 a.m. And so this is all the data that I saw from 11:25 through 11:50. it would seem apparent to me that the device is moving around, but it's generally somewhere around the area of the key. And then from 11:51 to 11:52, what I saw in the records was that the phone seemed to do something just like I saw Mr. Booker's phone do, in that it began to move south and southwest. If someone were on Peachtree Parkway at about that time, this would be consistent with that movement, moving away from 11:51 to 12:31. We saw same thing I saw on Mr. Booker's device. First, the phone started up here at 11:51, moved southwest, furthest location at 12:26 p.m., and then by 12:31 it had moved north again, back in general direction of which it came. And then by 12:32 it's registering in an area geographically close to the QT.
Thank you.
This just shows from 12:32 to 12:38, the device showing, the network believing the device was in or around that area here in Peachtree Forest. And then by 12:38, the network believes the device has moved away. And then here I'm mapping all the cell site location, all the timing advanced data from 12:38 to 1:14 p.m. And we saw the device move south, slightly southeast, back in the area of that redan or left on area.
Now, I know not all the coordinates are consistent because Mr. Booker's phone had CSLI, but do those points, the start and ending points, are they consistent with Mr. Booker's movements as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then by 1:15 p.m., the timing advanced data showed his device in an area close to the Turnberry location. And this is all the timing advanced data that I had to look at from 1:15 p.m. to 1:34 p.m. and it's showing general measurements in that area. You will see, in this case, and you see it in some of the other records too, where it looks like it's CSLI. This is not. This is where the measurement wasn't complete to where it got the full information that it needed to judge how far out in the sector it was. So this gives us a valid sector for that measurement.
We've been talking about TAMI advanced data. Could we move to CSLI data?
Yes, so we will now look at, I looked at his CSLI and he had no data, there was no data in the records for the time period of the homicide or leading up to it, immediately after.
Okay.
But there were 5 phone calls after everything was known to be over with. And the 5 phone calls from 2 p.m. to 2:32 p.m. These are 5 phone calls between the device I understood to be associated with Mr. Hewley and the device I understood to be associated with Mr. Collins. And it's registering a tower in a sector here. The details about where that is here in the call-out box, but it's in an area that could be consistent with covering both of their residents, as well as the Turnberry location. So we have Mr. Hewley's residence here, very close to the tower and sector, and Mr. Collins's residence here.
Let's talk about the data sessions.
So we did have a couple data sessions where the network registered the device using something that required data.
Could you give us an example of that?
Well, if I turned on my phone now and I went to my YouTube application and started watching a video, it would register something.
Okay, thank you.
So we see the data session here where we've gone back in time. I've taken you all through the CSLI. Now we're going to look at the data from 11:56 to 11:59 a.m. It registered a tower in a sector here in the Peachtree Corners area south of the QT. But by 12:39, there was a session here at 12:39, and it's registering a tower in a sector that could be associated with the QT, the coverage area for the QT, if the device was there. And from 12:44 to 12:46, there was 2 data sessions that registered a tower in a sector here, mostly associated with the area around, generally around 285. So the previous session was northeast up here, closer to the QT. This section is now registered southwest of it.
Let's move to the next phone.
And the final phone that I looked at records for was the 470-839-1041 number that I understood associated with Ms. Jeremiah Pleasure. Let me back up a bit. And for her device, we will have CSLI and timing it advance data. So, the data that I had to look at for hers was related to the phone calls between herself and Mr. Collins. And those phone calls all registered her device being here in the area around, this is Morrow here, north, east. This is Stockbridge in this area. So it's clearly southwest of the area where his device would have been. Right? And then after that time period, from 1:13 p.m. to 1:30 p.m., I saw the device begin moving away from that area, and it moved east towards Turnberry. Up until 1:31 p.m. here, this is demonstrating this measurement, showing a measurement for the device that could be consistent with being at or about Turnberry Place.
Thank you, sir. Grab a seat. Mr. Wilbanks, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lewis.
Investigator Wilbanks, good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Obviously, we've known each other for years, but if I happen to ask a question, it probably won't be, I will ask a question you don't understand. It'll probably be an unartful question that can probably be phrased in a different way. So you just let me know, and I'll try to phrase it in a way the jury can understand. I'm going to ask you to use the slides again. Most of my questions relate to the slides, so I'm going to ask
Okay.
you have control of the slide up there, right?
Well, I don't know that yes, I can back it up, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to number 1. It doesn't have an automatic reset. We gotta. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. It's sort of like the Blockbuster. You gotta rewind.
Very good.
Going back to number 1. Okay, good. So can we go back to Booker's slide number 1? And that's the locked Lochdevor. Lochdevor. You're saying the B like a V. Lochdevor. Okay, good. The initial diagram. I saw this.
The first one. Okay, good. There we go. Now, is this AT&T? Who is this?
This is AT&T.
AT&T says this is what?
AT&T has measured this location and said, this is the location in the records from them that they have made an estimation on based on their measurement.
Okay.
And they said, here's a distance out of 1,000 meters. So they're saying it could be 1,000 meters or it could be beyond that, but this is the depiction based on that 1,000-meter reference in the records and that location.
Okay, so when we say 1,000 meters, do we mean the radius is 1,000 meters then?
Right.
Okay.
Radius out from that center point.
From that center point. So it could be here,
Could be.
or it could be here also.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that distance would be longer than 1,000 meters, is that right?
It wouldn't be longer than 1,000 meters from the center, from the latitude and longitude that they measured, but those two measurements, you indicating one north and west and south and east, if you measured that, that would be closer to maybe 2,000 meters.
I got you. 2,000 meters. Now,
Forgive me, put that in football field length for me. What is 1,000 meters?
Well, you know, roughly, to try to convert it to English measurement, you know, roughly 3 feet per meter. It's not exactly, but
That'd be 1,000 meters would be 3,000 feet?
that's a rough estimate without me breaking out the calculator.
okay, I got you. All right. Next diagram. Now, hold on. This is
David Booker's phone in and around the Texaco at 1:16, about 1:16 a.m. Is that right?
116 and 143 was measured.
Okay, well, see, I thought you said that 143, it would have been up there.
But that's correct, that's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
well, yeah, I was just referring to this one for now.
Correct.
Okay, good. So when we get up here, we're talking about 1:43 a.m. Is that right? Okay, good. Next slide.
And so for the ninth, this is the now cell site location information, not the local board anymore.
I got you. Cell site information for David Booker at 12:49 a.m.
Right?
Right.
Okay, now, I understand that this is where the Texaco is, and this is where, is it AT&T?
AT&T.
This is where they believe his phone might be. That's the cell tower it's hitting off of, is that right?
Right, it's communicating for this call through this tower in sector.
Okay, phone call, not text.
Correct.
Okay, not accessing YouTube, but a phone call.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay, good. Just let me borrow this 1 second. So what's this distance from the center to the edge there? Is that 3 miles?
Yep.
Okay, good. So when the jury's looking at it and it looks bigger than that, it's only because of the size of the geographical areas covering. Anytime the jury looks at this, can they rely on this point here to the edge being 3 miles?
Yes.
Okay.
And to be clear about that, it could be much closer to the tower than that, or it could be further from the tower than that. I would have to look at the available towers in that area to make a better assessment about it. But I use the standard 3 miles so that you can know there's consistency. Every time you look at it, just know that that measurement is a 3 mile measurement.
Okay, so even if that triangle gets bigger or smaller, we're talking about 3 miles.
Right.
Fantastic. With the CLC.
CSLI information. Is that right? Okay. The next.
Now, this is the only one that's different than that because this communication here is through that radio access on this telephone pole here in downtown Atlanta. So this one is measured in hundreds of meters versus miles.
I got you. Go back to the prior one. I believe your testimony was that at somewhere around 12:49 that my client David Booker called Miles Collins. Do you recall testifying to that?
Yes, this is an outgoing phone call from the number associated with David Booker to Miles Collins.
Okay, good. Not a text, but a call.
A call. I only did mapping, so I didn't look at text.
And that's fine. And I thought your testimony was when you had Hughley's phone up that Hughley was not in the area of the Texaco. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
If he was with his device, he couldn't have been there.
Okay.
So if I understand you correctly, at 12:50 near the Texaco on July 9, 2022, David Booker is by himself.
Well,
Pause.
He's not with Hughley and he's not with.
With Miles Collins. Is that fair to say?
I believe the records show he's not with Hewley. And you would, through inference, say he's likely not with Miles Collins.
Since he's making a call
Calling.
and not texting.
Right.
Okay, good. All right. On to the small diagram. I'm sorry, the small tower. That's the next one. Is that right?
Right. So this is the only tower like this in the records that I mapped.
Okay. And that distance from
I set it at 200 meters. It could be outside of that. These towers are
600, so that's 600 feet by our rough estimate. I know that's definitely less than a football field. That's probably less than half a football field. Is that right?
right. So
Right.
you know, but again, I don't know exactly. I just know that it's closer likely than a mile within that area.
Well, you say a mile, but I want to make sure, I want to try to get this thing as tight as possible. If I understand this diagram that the jury's looking at now, we got a half a football field between where we believe David Booker is and Texaco. Is that fair to say?
I'm not gonna measure half of football fields. What I would say is that these type of towers measure mostly in hundreds of meters, not miles.
I got you.
It's not like the macro towers that we've looked at in the other.
I got you, but do they differ in their coverage?
Yes, very much.
So one tower might cover one block, one tower might cover 4 or 5 blocks.
Right, it would depend on how AT&T built the network and what that tower could do in that area. So if there's a lot of tall buildings in that area, you may need one on every corner to get the signal in and out because of all the infrastructure and the buildings and so forth. So,
Okay, well, there's a picture of a tower. I'm assuming this is the exact tower at that area.
It
Okay,
is.
so we can see in the picture, in the background of the picture, there appears to be like a 6-story building. Is that right?
right, there are tall buildings around the area.
Okay, and so you went there and took the picture, correct?
I went there, yes.
So
I wanted to be certain about it. That's the reason I went there.
I got you. So based on your experience, sort of how the number of buildings near the tower and the height of the buildings near the tower, would you believe that this cell tower handles 1 block, 5 blocks? What would you estimate based on your knowledge and your experience of AT&T? This is a tower that would go out a block or 5 blocks or 10 blocks. What would your estimate be?
I mean, I gave you my best visual estimation of what I thought it would do. Like I say, if you're on a straight path here, it could be down further.
I got you.
But, you know, it's a short tower, it's not very tall, and, you know, there's gotta be that direct radio wave communication between the tower and the device. So, again, with tall buildings in the area, it's not going out crazy far.
I got you. Next slide, please. So this is 10:07 a.m. through 11:20 a.m. on July 10th, 2022. So this would be prior to the homicide. Is that right?
Correct.
And I thought your testimony was at 11:20 a.m. That represented the last time that David Booker made a call. Is that right?
No, so this is the low-to-bore, so this is that latent activity that's going on, the measurements that are taking place between the network and the device. So there's nothing about the low-to-bore that's being done affirmatively by a user on the phone. It's just happening in the background.
Okay, so that's the last time that David Booker's phone hits off a cell tower. Is that right?
Well, again, keep in mind, low-to-bore is not tower-based. There's measurements taking place to the towers, but it's giving you AT&T gives us a latitude and longitude, and then a degree of certainty for where it thinks the device could be.
Okay, and so as you look at it, and it plots points at various points in time between 10:07 a.m. and 11:20 a.m. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's what each of those circles represents, a sort of hit on the phone. Is that right?
That's a measurement that AT&T recorded related to the device.
Okay, good. And so as you look at the map, you're thinking this is I-20 to 285? What's the route?
This is clearly I-20 here going in, and yes, it looks like it goes 285 around, and then, it looks like it goes to 85 north and then 285 around right here.
85 north? So it goes, so it's I-20 into the city.
Over to
Into the city.
285 north, then on 285, then to Peachtree. That's what it looks to me like.
I want to understand that route. It's not I-20 to 285, it's I-20 into Atlanta, into the city of Atlanta. Is that right?
Yes, I would
Into
say
the
so.
city of Atlanta. So when we get to the city of Atlanta, I always call it to connect the 75 and 85 mashed together. Is that right?
Correct.
So then it appears that David Booker's phone then goes north on 85 or 75?
Well, it's combined right there.
Combined, that's right, it's combined, but when it separates, because by the time we get into North Atlanta and the Chamblee, it's not combined anymore, is it?
Right, yeah. It
By the
appears to
time
be-
we hit Chamblee, where?
By the time we get to Chamblee up here.
Yeah, where's it, what road is that? There you go, what road is that? That's what I'm trying to understand.
I mean, it could be 80, looks to me like it could be 85. It's 285.
Okay. You believe it's 85 to 285, is that right? And then once you get to 285, he's heading which way?
141, or it's combined Peachtree Industrial and Peachtree Parkway right there.
I got you. And so the last locavore that you have for David Booker is 11:20 a.m., is that right?
There's going to be a break in time, and it will pick up again.
Okay, when it picks up again, it's what time?
That's the next slide, at 11:50.
11:50. Okay, that would have still been prior to the homicide, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, good. What's the last locavore information you have for David Booker prior to the homicide? Is it that 11:50 a.m.?
I'll advance it. It's going to be, so my understanding was the information was at about 12:38 p.m.
That's correct.
And so, by 12:31, it's in that area, and it's there until, it's estimated to be in the general area until about 12:39.
Okay, now, this is what I want to understand. How big is this area?
Well, this is like, for example, this was, the AT&T gave us a degree of 1,500 meters and possibly beyond that. But it says, it thinks it's here, but it could be beyond that. This is an estimation.
1,500 meters being about 4,500 feet.
From that center point.
Do the math on that. What is 4,500 feet in miles?
Okay. And of course, this is about
3 or 4 different points on this one map. Is that fair to say?
Right, each of these points are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measurements. You can see again the longitude where it thinks it is, which is very close to Peachtree Parkway. That measurement, but it's giving it a degree of certainty.
I got you. And I just got a translation of 4,500 feet being about 0.85 of a mile. Does that sound right to you?
Right.
Okay, so it's under a mile. All this. That's what I want to understand.
Estimation.
Is it an estimate? I got that. From here to here, this makes reference to the same point, right? This point to the end of the circle, is that the 0.85 miles?
Roughly.
Is that right?
I trust your calculations.
Is that right? Okay, good. Okay, that's what I want to understand. I got you. So
it's less than a mile from that center point to the edge. I got that. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so this next slide was that movement away from the key.
Okay, are you able to estimate the same way we did with the last one, what route is being taken? I mean, as you eyeball it, is it local roads or is it major interstate?
To me, it looks like a different route on this 285.
Definitely
way
different.
back.
Y'all are talking to each other.
My fault. I understand it's a different route. Are you able to tell the route?
I mean, you can form an opinion based on where you see those dots along that route there. Sure.
If that were a major highway, what would you think it would be?
I would think this area here in the middle is 285.
Okay, next map. Turnberry Place. What's the
significance of the Turnberry Place Stonecrest address? Were you told?
I reviewed reports, and that was a location I reviewed and found a note in the reports.
Okay, all right.
But you don't recall why it was important?
No, I do, I don't know if that's something I can talk about.
I don't know, that's why I'm asking.
I understood that to be associated with the return of the rental vehicle.
Okay, so you understood Turnberry Place to be the return of the E350 Mercedes at issue, is that right?
Yes, that was my understanding.
Good, that's clarity over everything. Next slide.
Tell me what this slide is.
So this is demonstrating that between 1:37 PM and 1:45 PM, the measurements indicate a movement away from Turnberry Place.
And Turnberry Place that's in DeKalb, is that right?
Yes.
All right, good. You can, I don't know if there's one more, two more till you get to the CSLI data. That's the next thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
12/22 to 12/35 on July 10th, 2022. There's a call that is made to or by David Booker.
So
To
this
the
call here is an incoming phone call
Okay.
at 12:22.
Do you know who it's from?
I don't know that number.
Okay.
And it registers with this tower and sector, with the base being here, the base of that tower being here, and the sector being west of the tower. And the next call at 12:23 is an incoming phone call from that same phone number that registered a different tower in a different sector than the previous, sort of going north and east.
But that's not a phone number that was associated with any of the other phones that you examined, is that fair to say?
Not the parties that I'm mapping, no.
Not the parties, fantastic. Just let me hold this for a second. And again, that distance there is 3 miles, is that right? Okay, fantastic. I don't want to sound like a broken record, I just want to get these distances right.
For the jury. That's all the questions that I have, Investigator.
Well, guys, thank you very much.
Click.
Woodlands, I just have a few questions, sir.
Yes, sir.
I represent Mr. Collins, and I need you to go back to where we were. Most of the questions I'm going to ask deal with Mr. Collins, but if you would first go to the slide that shows 1249 for Mr. Booker. There we go. The Texaco is obviously depicted in the middle of that diagram, correct?
That's correct.
And there is a wedge-shaped purple area southwest of the Texaco station, correct?
Yes.
Is that where Mr. Booker's phone would have been at 1249?
Yes.
Okay, if you could speak up just a tad.
I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. And if I understand correctly, and now if you could go to the 1249 slide for Mr. Collins. Okay, and again, that is well southwest of the Texaco at Lindbergh, correct?
Correct.
Now, if I'm understanding correctly, there was a phone call from either Mr. Collins's phone to Mr. Booker's phone or vice versa, placed at 1249, is that correct?
Yes, it was an outgoing phone call from the Collins phone to the Booker phone at 12:49 a.m.
And are you able to tell us how long that phone call might have lasted?
I'd have to go back and look at the records. I didn't.
But it is reasonable to infer, since one is calling the other on the phone, that they are not together at 1249, correct?
It would be reasonable to me.
And it is reasonable to infer that they would not have been in the same vehicle at 1249. Is that a fair inference, sir?
It is to me. Yes.
Sure enough. Now, the amount of information you have as to Mr. Collins is significantly less than the amount of information you have as to Mr. Booker and to Mr. Hewley. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair.
Now, if we can go to the next slide, I think for Mr. Well, keep going. There we go. This is the next slide, and this shows us an area, first off, where Mr. Collins' residence is down in the Lithonia area, correct?
Correct. At
And that
10:06.
shows his location, or the phone's location, excuse me, at or about 10:06 in the morning, right?
Correct.
And then there is a second area which is shaded up more towards Peachtree Corners at 11:23 in the morning, correct?
Correct.
Unlike Mr. Booker and Mr. Hewley, there is no virtual path leading from one location to the other. Can we go back to this, why did we go back to the, yeah, there is
No, this is mispleasure.
there is no route showing us the path that would have been taken from one location to the next, is there?
Right. There was no data provided for that.
And just so there is no ambiguity whatsoever, looking there, you can see where the Quick Trip is at Peachtree Parkway, right?
Right.
You can see the shaded purple area at 11:23, correct?
Right.
11:23 would have been approximately 75 minutes before the incident in question, correct?
Correct.
While the area, the purple area is obviously somewhat close to the Quick Trip, it does not encompass the Quick Trip, does it?
It does not.
And in fact, there is no phone record from Mr. Collins's phone ever in an area that is, that encompasses the Quick Trip, is there?
I had no data showing that.
Okay. Now, the next thing you got from Mr. Collins is, and if I'm understanding this correct, let me take a look at my notes. Taking me a minute. Thank you, sir. We'll go to the next one. Here we go. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. 12:51 is the next time you get any sort of information, right?
Correct.
And at 12:51, the shaded area is right here, correct?
Correct.
And that is well into DeKalb County, correct?
Yes.
As you look at the shaded area, you can see Clarkston, correct?
Correct.
Scottsdale just on the edge, correct?
Correct.
Stone Mountain just on the edge, correct?
Correct.
And that would have been approximately 12 to 13 minutes after the incident in question, correct?
Yes.
Good enough, sir. And again, you have no specific route taken by Mr. Collins prior to his 12:51, what was it, a phone call at that time?
Phone call.
Phone call, okay. There's no indication where he had been immediately prior to 12:51, correct? I mean, obviously at 11,
Can I back up one slide?
sure, go ahead, take your
So
time.
we're at 11:23, and the next thing that will happen is 12:51.
Okay, so between 11:23 and 12:51, there is no record of where he would have, or his phone would have been, whether he had his phone or not, right?
There's nothing in the records that gives me any information about what happened.
Okay, so there's just a period of an hour and 28 minutes, I guess, where you have no idea where his phone is, right?
That's correct. Based on the records, I have no information.
Okay. I don't think I have anything else. Thank you very much, sir.
Ms. Drake?
Donna, could we take a 5-minute?
Okay, all right. Let's just take a real quick comfort break. And we are off the record.
you may get bumped to the next available tower.
Right.
You also mentioned, I believe, that weather could affect the reception tower, kind of like, I guess, when our cable keeps going out whenever it rains or something
Right.
like that. Is that because of cloud cover and things like that?
Atmospheric conditions can interfere with the ability to communicate over radio signals. So yes, it can have an effect.
Okay, can I have just 1 second, please?
Certainly.
Bless you. And the TA data, that is an estimate of the phone company, correct, as to the location of the phone?
Right.
And that information, even though it's by a different system, is basically the same for all 3 major carriers. Is that what I understood you to say?
They all do a version of that,
Okay.
of that process.
And just to clarify, on July the 9th, the time frame you were looking at, was it approximately 12 hours, give or take, before the death that we're here about?
It was on July 9th in the early morning hours, midnight to 2 a.m. roughly time period when we had what I understood to be video in Atlanta. And so for
10
me,
to 12 hours?
maybe more than that, but it's,
Okay.
yeah.
Thereabouts.
Yeah.
And based upon what you saw in the records, the phone that you're associating with Mr. Hewley did not place him at or around the Texaco at all?
No, as I say, if he had his device with him, he wasn't there. Could have been there.
Okay. If I can have just 1 more second, please, Your Honor?
Certainly, Ms. Trigg.
I believe that's all I have at the moment. Thank you.
All right,
Can I ask 1 or 2 more questions?
certainly.
I don't know if the state has anything in mind.
I haven't, that's where I was going next. Go ahead, Mr. Clegg.
Okay, 2 things. First off, the Texaco station on Lindbergh, there is no evidence to place Mr. Collins's phone near that particular location. Is that correct, sir?
For Mr. Collins, there's no data for that time period.
Now, there appeared to have been sometime on the 10th, after the homicide would have occurred, phone communication between Mr. Collins and Mr. Hewley. Was there any indication of phone communication or the phones contacting one another prior to the homicide on the day of the 10th?
I could go back through it, but I don't recall that.
Good enough, sir. That's all I needed.
Well, I need to clarify that now that I think about it. I was looking at data that could be mapped. There could have been a text message or more in there that I'm not familiar with, but as far as phone call, I can be sure about that.
Okay, good enough. That's all I needed
Yes,
to
sir.
know. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
sir.
Mr. Melvin?
Just a little bit of limited redirect, Judge. I'm going to call your attention to what's on the screen. It's labeled Miles Collins CSLI in reference to the Texaco. And as I understand the screen, just a few minutes before, the 1:15 time period, Mr. Collins did make a cell phone call. Is that right?
Yes, this demonstrates that phone call at 12:49 a.m.
All right. Now, you don't have any data information from Mr. Collins' cell phone loader bar, correct?
Right, Mr. Collins didn't have any of that timing advance data that we talked about.
Okay, and I just want to go one more slide on Mr. Collins' cell phone before we publish the Texaco video that's previously been admitted into evidence. This slide that says Collins at 11:23 is in the Peachtree Corners area. This is what I want to ask you about. That same small triangle with Mr. Collins, is Mr. Booker's phone and Mr. Hewley's phones also in that location?
Yes, their phones were in that same area.
And so when Mr. Clegg is saying there's no information, but at 11:23, an hour before the murder, all 3 cell phones are in this area right here.
Yes. You didn't have anything to do with the DNA analysis that shows Mr. Healy being at QTD?
Do not.
Judge, at this time, would like to publish what's previously been admitted into evidence of State 68. I'm going to ask you about the consistency of the times, because I believe that you have one of the
Booker locations at close to the Texas.
to pay attention to the times.
Okay.
Oh, and Your Honor, I know that Mr. Lewis had previously given you a charge on video. I'm going to show one video that's pretty quick, but another one is going to be a 40-minute video. I'm going to fast forward through that video. Have we read that video charge, Mr.
I
Lewis?
have not read the video charge. Do you request that?
I do that.
Okay. All right. You're about to see a video. I have directed the parties of the video to be, excuse me, I have directed parts of the video to be removed. So for this presentation is not to unnecessarily extend the duration of the trial. Removed portions may include periods of dead time, matters bearing no relations to case before you, or for specific legal reasons that are not proper for your consideration. You are not to draw any inferences for or against either party based on the removal portions of the video by this court. And since I'm not sure exactly what you're going to play, I'm going to go ahead and read the law enforcement charge with video.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it? Okay.
Your Honor, there's no statement or anything like that. What we're going to show is the interior of the text code and then the exterior of the text code showing this man pulling out.
Okay, so there's not going to be any law enforcement.
Correct.
Okay, I'll hold that charge until we may need it later.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Investigator Wilbanks, let me pull on over to the text code. And this is off of States 68, previously admitted into evidence. It contains a number of videos around the text code at Lindbergh Drive. Do you notice the time that's on the lower left-hand, lower right-hand corner of that video?
Yes, I see a timestamp of 1:17 and 38 seconds a.m.
Okay, if you'll please watch this video.
Can you see? I can't want to make sure. You can see. Okay.
I'm stopping the video at 1:18:04, and there's someone talking on the cell phone. We've previously had States 69 tendered and admitted that shows that this man is David Booker. Is that consistent with the CSLI?
Whoa, hold on.
I'm going to object to that characterization. First of all, prosecutor can't testify to who it is, and the investigator or any other witness can't sit on the stand and say, this is who this is in the video. That's for the jury to determine. I'm going to object.
The laws actually change. 701 allows opinion testimony, and Detective Jorstad actually did say on State 69, yes, this is David Booker, from a still shot of video from 68. That testimony is already.
And so then the prosecutor can tell this other investigator, when there's a sequestration order in effect, that that's David Booker? Yeah, I don't think the law has changed in that regard. My objection stands.
Any legal response to that?
And I'm not sure, I'm processing the objection. My question to the detective is, is it consistent with Mr. Booker's CSLI of Mr. Booker?
Okay, but that was not your question, so I'm going to sustain the objection if you'll rephrase your question, because that, I think, is a valid question.
Yes, is what we're seeing on states 68, gentleman targeted on his cell phone consistent with Mr. Booker's CSLI, making a cell phone call from the Texaco gas station?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to go to the more extended video. It's taken on, excuse me. So, I believe, and of course, these are the videos from the Texaco gas station. And it's picking up at 01:15:85. Just like I told the court, I'm going to fast forward it to 01:18:24.
Okay.
See a car pulling up at 01:16:38. I'm going to take it, I'm going to fast forward it. See this, someone get rid of the store at 01:17:38 on the cell phone. At 01:32:33, gentleman looking underneath that sedan, and another gentleman by that sedan.
Yes, sir.
And when we saw earlier on the video of the gentleman on the phone walking into the store, is that consistent with the CSLI information that you had, sir? Of David Booker's phone, making phone calls around that time period?
Yes, sir. It's within that same minute. It's the phone call on that radio access network tower that I talked about was at 1:17 and 33, I believe it's 33 seconds.
Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
Mr. Lewis.
Judge, can you put the David, the Miles Collins 10:06 to 11:23 a.m.
Diagram back up? All right. Exact, yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
This is exhibit what? State's exhibit?
This is State's Exhibit 84.
State's exhibit 84. The prosecutor, before he played oh, fantastic. The prosecutor, before he played the video at the Texaco, indicated that, well, no, you go back to the prior one.
It's the same one. Lawrence, I just expanded it.
Okay, that's fine. The prosecutor, before he played the Texaco video, drew an area with the pointer indicating that Miles Collins and Hughley were also in the same area as David Booker. Remember that question he asked you?
Yes, all three phones were in that general area.
Fantastic. It was all, for me, it's all about distance and area. We indicate I believe the testimony was that we determined David Booker was at 0.85 miles an area in terms of the distance to the QT. Do you recall that?
Right.
Right, 0.85, not quite a mile.
His cell phone was somewhere in that area of the QT where the homicide occurred. Is that right?
Right. The representation I gave you of the records.
Right.
That's what it shows.
That's correct, representation of the records. The prosecutor
Sort of gave us a grand circle. Do we know the distance that Miles Collins' phone was from the QT? At the time, we were able to determine what David Booker's distance was from the QT?
No.
Okay, do you know what Hughley's
phone distance was from the QT?
at the time we can determine what David Booker's phone was from the QT?
Booker and Hewley, yeah, there's a lot of robust information about their location
Okay.
information at or about that time.
Okay, good. So at the point
Where we can determine that David Booker's about 0.85 away from somewhere in that area of the QT. Is Hughley's phone showing the same thing, 0.85, that same distance?
Right. Their phones and their records were very consistent about the areas that they would have been in
okay.
before
okay.
and after, yes.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying,
Hughley and David Booker's phone are within 1 mile of the QT. Is that fair to say?
I would say that. In some cases, time matters, so it would depend on exactly which time. We talked about a specific time.
I'm talking about within
But-
2 minutes
Before
before
the homicide and 2 minutes after the homicide, within 5 minutes before the homicide or 5 minutes after the homicide. I'm talking about within that,
the tightest range we can get. Within that tight range,
they're within a mile of the homicide. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair, yeah.
David Booker and Hughley.
Is that right?
Right.
But you can't tell us the same thing about Miles, is that right?
Right. I don't have records for that period to do any assessment.
Okay, all right, thank you very
Don't
much.
steal my pointer, mister.
I'm sorry. No further questions.
I'm very attached to it.
No.
Mr. Clegg?
No, I don't think I have anything else, Judge.
Mr.
I just wanted to clarify something, and I think it's just the state was thinking and it was worded maybe a little bit differently. I wanted to clarify. He asked a question initially about a call being made from the Texaco. Is that the way the question was worded, I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Based upon the records that you have for Mr. Booker, a phone call was made at, I think the time was 1:17, is that what you stated?
That's correct.
But you do not have records that says it came exactly from that Texaco, just that it was in the area.
No, it was within a close area, but I can't tell you exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Melvin?
If I could ask my question, Judge?
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Collins does not have location data at the time of the homicide, is that right?
Correct.
And no phone call was being made at the time of the homicide, is that right?
That's correct.
That's all right. Nothing else.
Nothing more, Judge.
Nothing else.
Okay. May we release Investigator Wilbanks?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much.